welcome to the 5th or 6th, if we count the opening event, day of Archival Assembly and the 5th day of the Symposium. On an administrative note, I can report that the hunt for doctors has been relatively successful. I'm up to 38. 2 more missing, and I mean the conference has been going on for so long that we cannot exclude that people have been awarded PhD since the start of the conference. So if anyone got their PhD since Tuesday or knows anyone who got their PhD recently or has had one for a longer time, please come up to me and sign the damn sheet. And with that, I hand over to I'll start awarding PhDs. So next time we come prepared and you get honorary PhDs at the entrance. So yeah, speaking up is the title of the topic. Brigitta Kuster is the moderator, please.
Does this work? Yeah. Good morning, everybody. And it's very early for everybody. I hope you equipped yourself with coffee and wake up substances. And I'm really glad that so many made it to join us for this thrilling panel today with Fiona Berg and Ahmeed Refaat. My name is Brigitta Kuster. And I would describe myself as a kind of a post-artist, currently indeed working in the field of film studies at the university, but bringing up this PhD topic again, I'm really always looking forward for opportunities to operate again, let's say, at the on the fringes of academia or in fields where artistic, curatorial, political, and historical approaches mingle. And I have the pleasure and honor to start today's assembly motto, resounding archives, the politics of listening to the moving image, and moderate this first session under the title Speaking Up. So lending a voice to somebody or raising your own voice, perhaps among others or in standing out from others, those are the key words that bring together the contributions of this panel that are both based on extended and very complex long-term researches in audiovisual, paper, and oral archive traces of vivid political cinematographic cultures in search of a renewed radical film culture, so to say. And by chance, I stumbled yesterday over a contribution by French film historian Georges Sadoul, who back in '64 tried to systematize film historiography. And for that matter, he distinguished 3 sources for the work of writing film history. First, sources and references on paper, he writes, handwritten or printed. Second, oral sources, and third, film-based sources, that is, the films themselves. And believe me, I guess the methodologies and approaches of producing historical account of cinema that we will encounter on this panel are much, much more complicated than just relying on these 3 sort of sources. But let me underline a thing before I introduce the panelists. We will be looking back at political moments and events of the late 60s and 70s with regards to 2 different radical countercultural projects. We will be encountering scenes of intense feminist self-organization and networking, transnational networking in cinema, and attempts to institutionalize resistant or at least anti-hegemonic film political projects and alliances, some of them also with a very state-centered approach in fostering anti-colonial and internationalists, namely Pan-Arabic and Afro-Asian solidarity within and via cinema. So doing things differently and doing different things in cinema. The two contributions clearly investigate the history of cinema as a way in which production, criticism, reception, and distribution must be brought and thought together, and not just as contexts, but constitutively, as it has been underlined in some panels that I have been attending days before. But how do we listen to these voices that have been largely silenced or forgotten or just distanced from us in archives? How do we hear them today and from where we are? What are the reverberations? I hope and trust we will be engaging on this panel with a cinematic way of listening, in the sense of the simultaneity of history and the present tense that is so central to the experience of film and the understanding of cinematic time. So I hope for a kind of a diachronic listening, in the sense that we try to trace the essential changes and breaks in the developments of unfolding of these voices raised. Ferdinand de Saussure, who began researching the historicity of language at the end of the 19th century, called the changing phonetics, the evolution of the sound of a language, its diachronic development. The Saussure's perspective, which later found its way in general historiography, can perhaps be linked to the idea of contemporaneity, of which Agamben has said that it does not simply take place in chronological time, but is something that pushes through time and transforms it. So understood in this way, contemporaneity is an urgency that corresponds to untimeliness, even to anachronism. A contemporary, eine Zeitgenossin, is allowed to perceive and grasp time in the form of a too early, which can also be a too late, or an already, or even a no longer. And I think what is special about the two research projects by Fiona and Refaat is that they attempt to be decidedly contemporary in that manner. But more than this, in the way they deal with the archives of the past, they are constantly moving from a synchronous to a diachronic listening point and back again. I believe that they are both in a constant force and back movement between the diachronic and the synchronic standpoint, so to say, whereby the latter, the synchronic moment, is decisive for the subjective perspective of the speaker in and of a certain language. This is the very perspective of what is called parole, maybe in French, and describes the very moment when someone raises their voice and makes themselves heard. That's what the panelists will hopefully about to do in a moment. And in producing cinema history via reactivating and reflecting its complex archival sources, I think Fiona and Refaat generate a kind of a situated knowledge that practices both at once a listening speech on the one hand and the conversing and expressive listening on the other hand. And we will, just for organizational reasons, let me explain you how we thought the panel to take place. We will start with a presentation of Fiona and then immediately go on with the presentation of Refaat. So both around 20 minutes, and then after both presentations, we'll open the floor for a discussion that brings also, or that we will try to bring together some of these methodological but also practical questions of those complex and political, of course, questions with regards to their research. So thank you very much, and Fiona, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Brigitta, for this introduction. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to contribute to this wonderful and inspiring symposium. Before I start my presentation, I want to begin with a 1-minute excerpt of an introduction by Madeleine Bernstorff from 1997 that I encountered recently, precisely from the 22nd of September, so exactly 27 years ago. And I thought it's maybe a nice opener.
Wir haben die Reihe mit Filmen von Immigrantinnen, Filmemacherinnen der zweiten Einwanderungsgeneration, Filmemacherinnen, die aus anderen Ländern hier in Deutschland studiert haben, ohne Land genannt, nach dem Video von Hatice Ayten, das am Freitag lief. Das bedeutet sozusagen ein Land, das keines ist und es doch gibt. Das ist sozusagen auch das, beschreibt sozusagen auch das Paradox, in der sich eine Migrantin befinden kann. Und wir haben auch überlegt, wie wir diesen Begriff ins Englische übersetzen und haben diese Hilfskonstruktion No Woman's Land, die wirklich nur erstmal eine vorübergehende ist und vielleicht auch einiges erzählt über Übersetzungsschwierigkeiten. Übersetzungsschwierigkeiten, die vielleicht auch heute Nachmittag bei der Diskussion auftauchten. Dabei entstand auch die Frage, auf welchem Begriff des Feminismus wir hier eigentlich operieren. Ich denke, diese Frage ist noch nicht gelöst.
So Madeleine is talking about a film by Hatice Ayten from 1995, which lends the film she's introducing its name. The program Ohne Land, or No Woman's Land, was part of a revisitation of the 1973 First International Women's Film Seminar. And last year, another revisitation of these two events happened at Arsenal Cinema. And some of you present here were attending or were very much involved in the shaping of this event called Feminist Elsewheres, that I put together with Arisa Pukpong, Sophie Holzberger, Charlotte Eitelbach, and Elena Baumeister, who's also here today. And even though I'm not here to speak for my colleagues, I will try to give a brief insight in what we did as a group, alongside the historical research that went into organizing our festival, bringing up the question we will discuss later, how do we actualize history through the working with the material and immaterial traces, such as film prints, paperwork, and oral history. To do that, we as a group brought different approaches to this research, consisting of our curatorial, academical, and artistic backgrounds, and I will elaborate further on this. While we were in the middle of this project, we already reflected our collective work in reworking of those histories in an article that was published this spring in the Feminist Media History Journal called Feminist Elsewheres, a Making of 3 Festivals in the Making. And it is the first text in English that we are aware of about the 73 event. And I'm also happy to share that with you if you're interested in reading about this in more detail. The paradox of displacement that the title Ohne Land indicates, literally meaning a country called without country, the question of translation and the form of feminism that was posed in this short record provides an interesting parallel to the work of Feminist Elsewheres and the title of this panel. Speaking up from a place that may feel uncertain or insecure, but it's still necessary to start from, to go somewhere else, elsewhere, to envision a better, a feminist future. But what kind of feminism are we talking about? The divisions of feminist movements alongside questions of gender, race, and class, specifically the exclusion of POC or transgender bodies, the global south, and migrant histories, out of dominant film history, make it impossible to fully affirm the heritage of the women's movement of the 60s and 70s and foreground the need for a transnational account. the fact that we, being born in the western part of Germany in the 1990s, still haven't seen a lot of the films that have shaped our understanding of these events and feminist film history more generally, was our starting point. To honor the engagement but also criticize a legacy is a challenging task, causing painful conflicts next to beautiful interactions. And if you were present the first day of this symposium, you have already heard Erika Balsam's contribution on the special screening that took place at Archival Assembly last year of the unfinished film by Wiebeke Löckeberg in its silent version, filmed at the Women's Film Seminar in 1973. The way we got to know about the material was a text by Norwegian film librarian Ingrid Holter describing Wiebeke's presence at the festival as a feminist elsewhere, a political space that marks a shared practice and history. At our festival, we screened the material with sound for the first time, and other than Erika described her viewing experience in the first panel, it was for me very relieving hearing their voices, demanding a change, but also searching for words and sometimes struggling with vocalizing what was evolving during this time. Here on the stills you see Ariel Daherty, co-founder of the Women Make Movies, who also came to visit our festival, as well as Wiebeke Löckeberg herself. In the middle there's Annabella Miscuglio from the Collettivo Femminista di Cinema from Rome, and Barbara Evans, Francine Winham, and Claire Johnston from the London Women's Film Group. In total, 15 filmmakers came from abroad, all attending the seminar that took place in 1973 at Arsenal, when it was in Berlin-Schöneberg. It was organized by filmmakers Helke Sander and Claudia von Alemann, coming out of the male-dominated student movement of the 60s, who were actively shaping the women's movement in West Germany. Over the course of 9 months, they were researching films made by women for the women's movement. Their strong political approach left aside films by female filmmakers that were not useful in this purpose as they understood it. And more than 200 women working in media and journalism and in cinema in Germany attended the program and were considered as multiplicators, meaning instructors for future events. As we already heard on Wednesday, the program was structured in 4 categories: films on labor struggles, on the representation of women in media and television, on sexuality, gender roles and abortion rights, and on the women's movement in Europe and the US. Discussions were held in the school across the street, where working groups were formed, and an exhibition was on display that was censored by the Berlin government. In the brochure you see here, was published in 1974 by the Foundation of Protestant Journalism, the Gemeinschaftswerk der evangelischen Publizistik, and their funding required an educational purpose, which explains the didactic format of the brochure, also determining which films shown being included in it, which brings me to my historical research around these films. This research was based on the exchange with and the work of Claudia von Alemann and also Stefanie Schulte-Strathaus, who were supporting our project from the very beginning. And Stefanie wrote her graduate thesis on as a re-evaluation of the first International Women's Film Seminar. And while the brochure in 1973 only naming 33 titles, Stefanie's filmography indicates 58 titles based on protocols, the daily program, information, and Arsenal's monthly program. And as the thesis circles more around feminist theory, drawing on questions of gender, the filmography itself left a lot of gaps for me, sometimes only naming a title. In my research, I could identify 51 of the titles. And to give an example how I came to this number, there's, for example, the title Women Make Movies, describing the work of the community-based organization, and amazed by the information that there is a film about that, we got in contact to Ariel Doherty, who clarified then that there was never a film with such title. Instead, as the list of Stefanie also indicates, there were 5 films brought by Ariel, produced by Women Make Movies, among other copies. So with the help of Ariel, I could close the last gaps that were bothering me to create a filmography of the event. And yeah, this is only one example of the reconstruction, not to speak about the film prints themselves, which alone was a challenging task, as information on them are highly dispersed. Some of them are in bad shape and not able to be screened. So locating the prints with the motivation to see them all before, like for our festival, remains unfinished. Especially the TV productions being shown are seemingly not retraceable. The gaps within this paperwork, in memory but also in my own knowledge on the films and their backgrounds, brings me to forward the collaboration needed for this transgenerational account that is not always easy, demanding a lot of care for the other and can produce a lot of chaos. The exciting thing about like one film leads to another film, leads to more filmmakers, leading to more people searching on those films, and institutions and archives taking care of this, multiplying the path that we could take an approach in this kind of event and the network it draws on. The wish to multiply the forces and the work on different levels brought us to the idea to make it, to do a research tutorial at Freie Universität that I did together with Charlotte Eitelbach, where the idea was to acquire a research group and working around these 2 events in their archives, circling the infrastructures of transnational feminist film works. Next to that, Maya Roth and me worked on an issue of the German historical journal Filmblatt with a text on the emergence of the Women's Film Seminar and its historical present, where I included also the annotated filmography. And for this issue, we were able to include a lot of beautiful photographs by Abisak Tillmann, who was documenting the festival, as you see here, and next to the first page of the list of attendees, on which we based the effort in contacting everyone still living, together with Claudia von Alemann. So as I said, in 1973 there was a revisitation of the event 25 years after the Women's Film Seminar by Stefanie Schulte-Strathaus, Birgit Kohler, Regina Holzkamp, Silvia Hallensleben and Madeleine Bernsdorf. And they called the festival, or the program, the point is to change it, Films Festivals Feminism. Except from Stefanie, they were all part of the Association for the Promotion of Feminist Cinema called Blickpiloten, which existed between 1989 to 2003, and which organized numerous film programs and publications on feminist cinema, amongst other projects. Next to their homepage, a part of the archive is accessible through the paperwork archive of the German Cinemathek. And it consists of numerous material, like programs from women's film seminars following the one in 1973, women's cinema initiatives and organizations like the Verband der Filmarbeiterin, or the first and only film distribution in Germany, Chaos Film. And there in the middle is also like a wonderful document that I came across. It's a manifesto-like description of what a feminist cinema should be considering, how do you say, from like Blickpiloten. And introducing you to this material would be like another presentation, but I'm happy to get to talk about it maybe later. The catalogue of 1997 event that you see here consists of introductory and theoretical text, including, for example, a reprint of Claire Johnson's text, Woman Cinema as Counter-Cinema. And the program consisted of 3 sections with around 80 films. For one section, they invited 5 feminist film festivals from Europe to put together one program each. Next to that, there was a program called Films with Bow and Arrow, which consisted of prints from the Archive of Friends of German Cinemathek, today the Arsenal Archive. The program on which the recording you heard in the beginning was part of answered to the Western European focus on the 1973 curation, as well as the rise of right-wing politics and attacks after reunification by explicitly foregrounding feminist migrant filmmaking from and in Germany. Here is like the only photograph that was handed to us from the event, as well as tape recordings you can see, consisting, for example, of the group's introduction to the festival, as well as a discussion with filmmakers Semja Poiras, Cynthia Beat, and Tito Steyer. In preparation of our festival, we of course talked to the group in person to get an idea of their work, their selection, but also their form of collaboration. They provided us with lots of material accompanied by rumors surrounding the event. In the archival folder that Stephanie handed on to us, we found the theoretical basis of the event's conceptions, letters, factors, documents, and a text list like the one you see there of the film Snake in My Bed from 1995 by Irma Diego, which I only discovered a year later now after our screening of the film at Feminist Elsewheres. As I already said, Feminist Elsewheres happened last year at Arsenal on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Women's Film Seminar, consisting of a program with around 40 films that we put together out of the previous historical programs, personal interest and contributions from our open call, to which over 400 contemporary films were submitted, as well as restorations, distribution programs, and research projects. The screening were accompanied by introductions and conversations with filmmakers, activists, curators, and archivists from all generations. 2 panel discussions and 3 workshops were dealing with feminist film work in different ways. There's one picture of one panel with the archive activist collective Invisible Woman, Gabi Babic, director of Remake Festival Frankfurt, and the curators of the Sojourner Truth Festival of the Arts that organized a revisitation of what is considered to be the first Black women's film seminar in the US. At Arsenal 2, an exhibition took place with video work and a display with the reconstruction of the exhibition with artworks by Evelyn Kuverts from 1973 was put up in the foyer, and in the middle you see some film prints we will be able to screen from the Arsenal archive. In our program, in the opening program that you see here, we showed the film I Am Somebody by Madeline Anderson, a documentary on a successful strike of Black women hospital workers in the US in 1969, which screened at the Initial Cinema 1973, together with a film by Margaret Paris, All Women Are Equal, about a white transgender woman in England from 1972 that was not present at the seminar. So our curatorial concept was based on this speculative approach, bringing together films from different times and places into conversation with each other. Our call for contributions opened up this programming towards our own gaps, which also made the process of selection even more challenging. We reflected on our curatorial work from the archives in the journal Frauen und Film, which will be published this fall, where we draw on 3 examples of our program: the encounter with the early infrastructures of Women Make Movies when it was still a community-based film and video workshop, the research on the wonderful film The Snake in My Bed, produced by Kleines Fernsehspiel and made by Irma Diego, who would later join the LA Rebellion, and the virtual encounter of protagonists from the Battle of Tuntenhaus from 1991 by Juliet Bershaw with Helke Misselwitz and Petra Schörtner's film Räume from 1990, producing possible alliances between the gay communist agenda and feminist filmmaking. And before I close this presentation, I want just to point out briefly another publication by Arisa Purkpong called Punch Card, which brings together conversations they had with Claudia von Ahlemann during film screenings, as well as artworks inspired by that and archival material that they encountered. And I think it's a beautiful way for preserving oral history and producing something new out of it, and I'm happy to talk further about these approaches. Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name is Ahmeed Refaat. I'm a critic and film programmer working and researcher working and living in Cairo, Egypt. I will be introducing a research project I've been working on maybe since 2017, which is mainly who started with a bigger focus on the cultural climate in Cairo or in Egypt during the 60s and early 70s, but then focused more on the history and the archive of the Cairo Cine Club, which is a semi-official initiative that started in Cairo in '67, post the military defeat of Egypt and the Nasserist regime in the 6 Days War with Israel. So it is a very specific moment where this whole initiative has started. I will try to first make like an introduction for this moment, like politically and also aesthetically, just an introduction, and so you can imagine what this initiative was born into. So as I said, this is the post-67, so there was a military defeat, but it was more than just this, because internally and locally, the whole Nasserist regime was in question, and a lot of the policies are being revised. A lot of the intellectuals also are reviewing their positions. There is a whole new historiographical or historicization effort that is being made by historians and intellectuals, just to review and look again at what went wrong, and also asking for more democracy, asking for new policies. And part of it, as part of this moment, were also the writers and artists, which were for most of the 50s and until mid-60s were producing some very realist films and literature. Also, this is socialist realism time, so realism was very much the main aesthetic that was there. I will borrow from literary critic Sameh Salim, who is describing the 67 moment as the moment where this realism is not working anymore. So the use of words like socialism, words like national projects, and all those stuff that started with Nasser, and mainly from 55 onwards, are not clear enough, and they do not describe what they used to describe. So this led to what she called a symbolic crisis, and realism was not able anymore to describe or to be an actual medium of the moment, especially after '67. Also socially, and I'm here borrowing from another literary critic, Ghali Shokri, there was this whole new generation of intellectuals and of artists that were brought up under Nasser, so they got the free education, they got this whole relationship, friend relationship to the Soviet bloc, so they got the socialist literature and the translations, and they got also, the free education and also access to cultural grants, although very corrupt, but still made a major role in the life of those intellectuals and artists. But at the end, those intellectuals were not accepted in the regime. So they were brought up and they got their whole education under the Nasserist regime, but once they're now ready to produce their work, whether their work is like socialist social studies, or whether it's literature or even cinema, they had no place under the Nasserist regime. So they are, in a way, the generation that was brought up by the Nasserist regime, but at the same time they had no place in it. And this is also the generation that will establish the film club. So just to give you a very quick context about what were happening before the Cairo Cine Club and where did the imagination for the Cairo Cine Club started. As early as 1955, Yahya Haqqi, who was a big writer and very influential novelist and storyteller, by the time after post 1952 and after the Egyptian coup or revolution, he was working in the cultural administration of the Nasserist regime, and he, with a group of film critics, started this Nadwat al-Film al-Mukhtar, which is basically a film night that happens outside in Abdeen, which is in downtown Cairo, and which also, we still have the archive of this initiative, and it was, in his words, a way to try to mimic the other foreign, mainly Catholic initiatives that are happening in Cairo and Alexandria, to show films, but before showing those films, making an introduction, contextualizing those films, and also having a discussion afterwards, which was mainly a practice by Europeans in Cairo, and mainly done in French. So Yahya Haqqi wanted to somehow nationalize, or have a national version of those events. After this, there was Ahmed al-Hadari, which is an important figure that brought up, that worked and was part of most of those initiatives. Was coming back from London and was a big fan of those film associations he saw in England, and so he started to establish the Egyptian Film Association, which is basically was the group from the earlier Nadwat al-Film al-Mukhtar. They want to institutionalize their work, and they started the Egyptian Film Association. And this is where then we moved to 1967 with the political moment that I was talking about, and also partially officially, as it came from the government, but also from the intellectuals, that they and film critics, that they want to establish a cine club, which more relying on the imaginary of the French cine clubs. So this is where this is the two things that actually preceded the Cairo Cine Club that we will talk about more. And also worth mentioning that around those times, in 1968, there is this magazine, we can see the cover, which used to be just a theater magazine. It now becomes the Theater and Cinema magazine. So there is a resurface of cinema as something important, cinema as a high art, cinema as a fine art. That was something that is happening all around during this time. And in 1972, by a group and mainly a fight inside the Cairo Cine Club. A part of the critics will go and establish the Film Critics Association, which is the same Film Critics Association that is working until now. To talk about just the approaches I used working on this project, it has been a long one. I've been working around this since 2017, but mainly, to be very reductive, there is the main history, which is I was asking the question: okay, what happened? How did this activity work? Who was the participants? I made long interviews with late Atiyat al-Abnoudi, who was part of this activity since its beginning. I made a long interview with late Ahmed Youssef, who was also part of this of the film club and the other activities that I talked about since the early 70s. I talked to Amir al-Aimari, an important critic who was part of this activity since early 70s too. Also, Amir al-Aimari has a book around the Cairo Cine Club where he talks about his memoirs. There are the magazines, like the one I just showed you. This also magazine was very much interested in what's happening in the Cairo Cine Club. On the other side, there is the paper archive of the actual club, which is mainly the publications, because with each screening, the club used to issue like a bulletin or a very small publication that has a presentation for the film, that also documents the discussion from the earlier screenings. It has reviews. It had translated materials from mainly European cahiers de cinéma and what's not in this publication. So it's also this is also where I tried to look to something that is a bit more than just what happened. Also look at potentialities. What could have happened? It was a moment that was full of potential, and it was a moment that is full of opportunities that mostly did not actualize, but I can tell from what's written and dealing with this written material, you can actually get a sense of those potentialities. Then this was mainly working on my own with this archive and doing those interviews, not on my own totally. I mean, I got the help of, I was working at CIC, a contemporary image collective by that time, and that was part of a long-term project. I also helped Maria and Rafael, which is a filmmakers duo, because they were interested in amateur cinema, and we visited this archive together. So I did this along with other people all the way. Then I decided that I will do a workshop at Cinematech. Cinematech Cairo is the institution who has this archive and also has other archives available, and also film archives. I don't know if Tamer is here, but you maybe saw him. It's an important institution in Cairo that gives a glimpse of accessibility to archives that otherwise I don't imagine I would have had access to. So I decided at this moment that I would do a workshop. I got a small grant from AFOC to do this workshop and to do a program. And the idea was the workshop was to have a call for critics to come together to work on this archive. In my head, the selection, and during the selection process, I wanted to have like not a homogeneous group, but also mainly people who are working discursively, who are working on critically, and who are not just, for example, there were no like filmmakers who wanted to do films. It was mainly about critics and programmers coming together to actually work on the publication. So I will very quickly tell you how did I design this workshop, and also this may reveal how I see this archive after working with it at that time. Those are the three main categories I was thinking about. The first one is tools. Tools are the tools that have been used in the Cairo Cine Club itself, like the translations, and this have been talked about in this conference a lot. The live translations were used in this in the club, but also a lot of material in the publication that I mentioned is translated. So we looked at translation in the film club, but also in our workshop as a tool where we can also get access to read English and French material in a group that not necessarily everyone can read English or French. So this is like how this tool was used in the Cine Club itself, and how this tool can be used in the workshop, and how used in the workshop itself. Another tool is the discussions, which also had like a really interesting event in SİNEMA TRANSTOPIA, where multiple researchers and film programmers and moderators spoke about the discussions that happened. Discussions were a very important part of the Cairo Cine Club, and they were also documented in the publication. So we looked at the archive and the legacy of discussions in the film club, how it was, how did it go, how it was used, and then we looked at how we use the discussions ourselves in the group. At the end, we tried to look at the social history of the whole film club as a cultural activity. So we looked at who knew who, for example, and how did this made them a group that came together and worked together and saw each other inside and outside of the club, and how did this shape their writings and their activities, for example. This is a picture from a card of the membership for a worker from the 71-72 season, and also working with the participants of this workshops. We're now working on some of some actualizations and how to share this with the work on this archive with larger public. So we have a screening of Yusuf Shaheen's Al-Ikhtiyar with a resharing of the discussion that happened in the club around it, and also with a guest to talk about the whole cultural moment, and also to talk about the Cine Club. Another researcher and film critic is working on the profile of the angry critic, which is something that we came across a lot in this publication. The ones who were very angry about the stuff they saw and about what they didn't like and about other critics. And the third event is a focus on one specific critic, which is Fathi Farag, who is also a critic who tried to go beyond what's good and bad. This is a very good film, or this is a bad film, more into bringing other ways to see and other ways to deal with films. Like, for example, he tried to introduce and use psychoanalytical critique and analysis. He, of course, tried to use a lot of Marxist analysis. So yeah, this will be also a presentation about him. Just to, maybe this we can talk about more in the discussions. So okay, so I just said how I thought about this workshop, but of course it's not that easy when the actual workshop is happening. So there is I mean, I realized that there is that sometimes curators and researchers and also even moderators, they talk about workshops and tools and pedagogical roles and stuff like that, just curatorially as something interesting that happened. But I realized the hard way that there are, to do a workshop, then it's not just to say, oh, today we'll talk about translation in the Cine Club and translation in here. No, this need to be included. There are some specific activities that need to be done, how the group will come together, how they will go on their own to actually work with the archive and then come back together collectively, how they can contribute to each other. This is a whole other thing. There is people who live their lives for this shit, and it's not that easy. And also the other thing, which is probably also something we can discuss, it's just not a problem per se, but there is different generations, and when we say generations, we usually think about consecutive generations, a generation that ends and then another one that starts, but we do not think very much that generations coexist. They exist simultaneously, and the interaction between them is actually it shapes that moment, the moment that we live in a lot. So different generations in the publication itself and different generations in the workshop that we did was an actual challenge for the workshop and for the work around this film club in general. I can talk more maybe during the discussion, but I think listening, I don't know if this whole conference is also coming from Walter Benjamin talking about listening to the past and listening to stuff, how we need to listen. But I think this is also something that I was trying to work on using the archive, which is trying to listen to what's more than just what's being written and what's being said, what's between the lines, what's not said, was very important. And thank you.
So thank you to both of you for these very rich indeed and generous presentations. And maybe given that the time is already advanced, I would suggest to open immediately into the audience. Maybe you got questions to the panelists. I don't see much. Or while you think about questions you might have, I'm not sure if I should hand it over to you both. We agreed maybe also on both of you to ask questions to each other with regards to the methods, like the way you're working. And I felt like in both of the presentations, the questions of giving this abundance of material a kind of a form, to look for a kind of a format that would be the good one, not only to represent history, but to come to terms with history, or as it is in the title of the festival, you organized this elsewhere. So where are we going to with revising this mass of material? And what you mentioned also, that maybe the most complicated of the so-called material is the people that are still living or remembering things, and also might have very strong clues and interests in the material you start to activating while researching. So maybe you could talk to that difficulty of finding a form.
Yeah, maybe starting from the archive, I don't know how you experienced this, but also being confronted with all these material alone, sometimes, I don't know, I could dive into this and really lose myself in reading protocols of like sessions from Verband der Filmarbeiterinnen that, I don't know, give me like an impression like how the discussions were being held, like what happened. But at some point I also asked myself, okay, what to do with it now? And in the first panel, there was also the question about like how the risk of fetishizing maybe this material, and also the task of reconstructing something. You pointed it out beautifully. In the end, it doesn't matter like which films were being shown exactly during this event, like this research I did, but yeah, more what could happen, and I think we experienced, or like working with the people active from that time, till now, actively working on their oeuvre, also kind of, don't want to lose the, how do you say, the Deutungshoheit over this material. There's also like a strong wish for them to control also like how they're being represented in history, and a wish also that, to engage and maybe cannot like also give, I don't know, it was sometimes hard also to turn away also of this generation and to do something different, and from there, maybe wish that what they want from that revisitation, for example.
I can say the same thing, because I took like a autocratic decision working on the workshop, and some of the participants were actually not very happy about it, because after doing this long interviews with the critics, and some of them are also filmmakers, I decided that those voices will not be included in the workshop. So that means that the participants, they come together and they look at the archive and the written material without those long, somehow nostalgic interviews with those critics that actually lived through the experience of the film club. I'm not saying that we cannot do the same thing. We can do the same thing with interlocutors. We can do the same thing listening to what's beyond the words with people who tell us oral history, just like we do with the papers. But in a way, I didn't want this this noise to be present, just to make it possible or even probable that we can listen to something different through this publication. So there was some exclusion in the workshop for those voices, for the favor of maybe the written words might bring something new.
This is not working? This is working. This is not actually a question, but just to comment on that, I think one of the problems is that you're dealing with generations that were underrepresented in history. So I think it's very different if you do further research on things or people or groups or movements that have already been researched and had or not just research, but people or groups or initiatives who have their place in film history. But if you approach those who have not, then of course for them it's very much about being seen maybe for the first time. So I think this is this was already part of the problem for us in '97 when we approached the '73 event. And but I like how both of you, how you put it that way, like this simultaneously. That the two generations, or that's anyway an interesting question. What defines a generation? From when to when does a generation last? But the fact that they exist simultaneously creates both conflict, but maybe also can be very productive in certain ways. So I think both of you, both projects, I mean, I know them quite well, managed beautifully, or you both made the best out of this and made it very productive by, as you say, looking at the potentials also, what could have been, and not to fetishize what has been, but what could have been, and what does that mean for us. And so this, again, like I'm trying to make a question out of this, but I can't. But thank you.
So my question is for Ahmed. Can you please explain more about films they were showing? Which films are they pursuing? Any goals? Advertising some kind of filmmaking approaches to cinema? What was their purpose of showing these films?
Sorry for the lack of presentation. I wanted to go very quickly, but yeah. So I saw some researchers doing the actual representation of films in in a proper analysis. I do not have that, but I can tell you a general grid. It actually it mirrors what those critics told me in the interviews. So there was a very active Soviet cultural institution in Cairo. There's a lot of Soviet films, because this is also the way the Cine Club used to get the films. It's through embassies and cultural centers and also distribution and production companies. Another thing is to mention that this was a private screening, so censorship laws do not apply to the club, and also the head of the club during the year of its formation is the head of the censorship entity of cinema. So he used to censor a film for the general public and then go screen it in the Cine Club for the intellectuals as some sort of intellectual bribe of something. So yeah, this is so you have a lot of Soviet films. You have, of course, all the European cinephilia. You have the new wave, but also a lot of films from the Czech Republic, a lot of films from Yugoslavia, where those also big institutions were very active in Cairo, and they also helped with the copies. And, but in general, those are like critics going to a cultural institution, asking for a film, getting the film themselves, go screen it, leave their ID until they bring back the film, get back their ID, and the next one.
It's a remark that leads to a question, and Brigitta's first question has already sort of opened up the territory. But what I find fascinating both your projects is something that we could call generational or intergenerational listening. You're trying to create a space for stories that, you know, the previous generations could or should have told you, but are not telling themselves, and you're making them. But at the same time, what fascinates me in both projects is that your interest is not purely historiographic. As you said, there's a danger of fetishizing the material, which could be a historicist fetishization. You know, look how wonderful all this was and how cool our grandparents were. And that, you know, the best that could come out of it is sort of a fan approach. But that's clearly not the case in either of these projects. it's a critical stance, and I'm fascinated by the little detail that you had all these interviews and chose to ignore them in the workshop because you wanted the written materials to speak and tell their story, if you will, in a way, in order to have a rampart against the mythologizing that invariably happens when you interview people and ask them to tell their life story. You know, we heard a wonderful example in the Lebanon panel about the director who said he'd made the perfect film and then it was destroyed in the war. And after he died, it turned out the film had been in his attic. He was just hiding it away so as to sort of cultivate the myth of the perfect film that had been lost in the war. And so I'm just very impressed in how both of you navigate those spaces and the vagaries of, let's say, oral histories by witnesses and establish yourself as critical historians, but also with an activist and curatorial interest in order to open up a historically informed space for your own practice. But I still want to ask, what's in it for you? Why do you do this?
I think that for me the most important is to see, like when I'm in the archive and researching on these collective organizations and efforts to produce those films, to learn about how to work together now and what's maybe the traps of these works and why it stops. So maybe kind of learning from their mistakes, or I don't know. We were pretty much aware of how we want to work together and like really exchanging on that as well. And and I had, I don't know, you were talking about the historical, or like this historical approach, and what bothers me when I did this also were like writing this annotated filmography, that I don't know, historical mistakes coming through, I feel like misinformation are so easily transmitted through gossip, through rumors, and then you say like, okay, this person did this, but in the end it was another one, or whatever. I've had like I mean, also a kind of a pressure maybe to do this right, and also like to put things right, and maybe also free yourself from this approach.
It's something close, but also I can be very clear. I have something that I want from this. With the film club in general, with the research of around the Cine Club, which includes the interviews and the workshop, I was looking at some sort of genealogy to what I was thinking about. Okay, what is when I react in terms, because sometimes I need to write around films. When I react in those words in this way, when I write about films in this way, where is this coming from? How did this evolve critically in Cairo? Why is it in my head? So I wanted to research this, the film criticism history in Cairo, and this was the golden ticket. This is the establishment of one of the most important critical generation of critics. So this is Samir Farid, Sami Saramoni, all those important critics' first introduction to film criticism. This is also the moment where film criticism became a thing, became like a respected thing, as you can publish in a good magazine, you can publish with the literary critics, just beside the literary critics. With the workshop, I had some clearer ideas about the archive, about what they were writings, and it became apparent to me that there are some voices that just, you know, because sometimes people say that this needs some revival. I want to explore and like find this critical voice that comes from an earlier generation, and that will inspire me, and I will rediscover this critic and reintroduce it to the public. But we do not talk about the other side of it. There are some critics and some critical voices that we want to symbolically kill. We want to extract them from the current discourse. We want to actually this voice to be less. We want for their symbolic presence to somehow disappear. I want really to kill them symbolically, not to have them around. I don't want to hear those terminologies again in the way that they used them. So those were the two things. But also doing this in my head, killing those critical voices, I also came across the ones that I really like, the ones that I find the way how to be, because it's also it's about this generational thing. As in the position now of the younger generation, it's easy to dismiss some older critics that wrote in the late 60s and early 70s. Oh, this is too naive. Oh, this is too focusing on content. Oh, this is just very superficially formal. But I think there is a way that if we listen carefully, we can also, and we're humble enough, and in this process I got humbled. I guess I can listen better.
I think there was another question back there.
Yes, I have the microphone already. Thank you. Thank you for not only your papers, but also for the insistent work you're doing. My question is a bit of a footnote to Vincent, but I'll put it more provocatively, I think. I was wondering if you're talking about those generational re-listening or listening anew, if there's anything like a new keynote or even a blind spot you'd be able to find. Because, I mean, we've been doing a lot of historiography on media, on film studies, things like that. And then we find out couple of years ago that while we've always read Laura Mulvey, we haven't realized what then Bell Hooks tells us about sort of ignoring the colonial part of the feminist history. Or now this year the book of unheard came out about the Schule des Südens. It's called The School of the South, and he realizes how all of the French philosophy is based in the Algerian War, in one way or the other. So we've been carrying along a lot of historiographies, theories, methodologies, with those sort of black holes or blind spots. And I was wondering if there's anything like that that you might be coming up with. So you said there's a certain form of terminology which you don't want anymore, and you're inventing something else, or you're finding a genealogy for something else. But I would be interested in also, what are the blind spots? What do you feel has been kept out as a turn, as Said's turn was towards literature maybe? And also, I'd be very curious about feminism. I mean, this has had a lot of methodological changes in the last year. So queer theory, which was very fiercely received also by the early feminists, as I remember from some discussions we had. So my question would be, is there anything that interests you where you'd say, this is what the blind spot of the 70s or 80s feminism was?
I mean, I tried to point to that in my presentation. I feel that, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of blind spots in feminist struggles. I think the most blind, like, the thing that you shouldn't do is like to put like different struggles, wie sagt man, ausspielen, play against each other. So when I'm fighting for like a quotation of women filmmakers in film production, I cannot, I cannot say, or like maybe the, I feel like we're like fighting for this bit of recognition, and you should not play against each other. So if you would need like more diversity, what does it mean? And maybe then there's like the 50th, the parität, like are we fighting for the 1/2 or the other? Sorry, I got lost a bit in my English, but yeah.
Well, I mean, of course, they have blind spots, but also I do have my own. Their blind spot is the one that you have mentioned already. You know, that was Cairo in the late '60s, and there was the height of Afro-Asian movements, and there is a lot of talk about third world cinema, third cinema, and a lot happening around the globe, even in Europe, but looking and looking at the programs, looking at the films, looking to the reviews, looking at the sources that they're reading and translating, this is, to say the least, less represented. So the amount of effort that has been made, of course, it was not that easy. I mean, to get those films was way harder than the Soviet or French or even American available cultural institution that will provide you with a copy. So to get something that is, to get an Indonesian film is harder, to get an Argentinian film is harder. So this was like a clear blind spot for me during a time that the claim was otherwise. So we claim that we're interested in socialist realism, we're interested in neo-realism, and we're interested in also the realism that is coming from third world and countries, and we're interested in third cinema, but we're screening Jules Jim, Chabrol, Pasolini. I mean, those are also important films, but that was happening clearly for me. You can really tell that this is a club that had no focus on third world cinema or third cinema. Although, of course, it was there. Yeah, I cannot say it was non-present.
I think I got the sign that we need to wrap up a bit, but I think we have still time. I mean, maybe I just use my position of having a microphone. Maybe coming back to this question of power relation and representation again, and maybe not so much putting to the blind spot. I would be interested also in hearing from you how much you put yourself in a way, even though critically, but into a certain kind of political, of the history of a certain kind of a political struggle with your research. And I felt like this, one of the tables you showed, the in-betweenness of the old is not dead, but the new is not there now. This is very much also the position that you take in your research, and I feel like this is maybe not so much pointing to blind spots or playing something against each other, but really looking back for knowing better where to go. So this is also the elsewhere that I feel like you're going to these elsewheres, but yes, maybe just a remark.
Quite shortly, I mean, this is normal that the elder ones, they always want to tell their stories and that the younger ones ought to listen. This, like, as you both said, listening to the generations before. And Fiona, you said it was sometimes difficult that the ones you are dealing with and who are like living parts of history, the way they are displayed. I just wanted to say, I mean, listening is something which goes into both directions. And the question is, like, the positions you are dealing with, has there also been some sort of listening from the elder ones to the younger ones, to you, for example? Or is this perhaps also a strategy, like, in what you're actually doing?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we talk to each other, and this is kind of an interaction, and but we experienced us. I mean, there are like the conflicts that were coming up, for example, on the question of gender, like and queer. A stand from today that some people might feel affected, attacked. Yeah, you know, like fighting for women's rights, and like now you want to like destroy. Now you're destroying this work. This is something you also are confronted with. So, and I guess our strategy was like to hold against that and try to stay in the conversation and not to say, okay, you're a turf. I don't talk with you. You're like so. This could also be happening, and now I lost my point. But also in dealing with like this, it could also like I think be an attack that we say, your work is so underrepresented, or I don't know your film work, and the person you're talking with is like, I won prizes, I was in festivals, I had a lot of recognition, but you just don't know that. And so I feel it's also a problem, like when only like looking at the historical or like in the paperwork, I feel like there's always in a way the need to talk with the person, because then, for example, I was working on the paperwork of Gertrud Pinkus, a Swiss filmmaker with material from the Cinematic Suisse, and I read into this material that she would have started like to work collectively as a protest also against like male-dominated or like the way the film production is somehow hierarchically structured. And then I talked to her, and she was like, no, that's really not what my standpoint was. And I think film production needs to be needs to have a hierarchy, and I'm quite dictatorial, and I have nothing to do with those collective things, and it was only like the only way for her to get into filmmaking. So I feel you need this exchange, and you're learning only from that.
I mean, a bit in a similar perspective. I think, they listen, and in a way, sometimes they listen very well, although they do not seem like it. So, but also, I'm a man, like I'm meeting older men who love to talk, but in a way, through my very brief comments, they end up by telling me, oh, you go read Fathi Farag with all this shit that you're saying and the comments that you're telling me. And they're kind of right, although from a couple of words from my end, they actually have profiled me in a way, and also in a helpful way. But I don't think this was my main challenge, because I'm capable of speaking to them and also to other people. But I think the actual challenge is listening, because I can also profile them very easily. You're conservative, you're actually, what are you saying? Are you like, now are you telling me that you're in support of a military dictatorship? Okay, wow. So now we need to go and talk about cinema. But when we actually go on and talk about cinema, and if the real valuable thing is actually is to listen to what's not said, what's not being said, and what's behind what's being said. And even in someone from a super conservative voice, you sometimes, if your ear is trained enough, you sometimes find something really valuable, and sometimes something really radical, I have to admit, from voices that, if profiled categorically, they're of course on the conservative, even alt-right kind of positions.
Yeah, if there is still sometimes, I would like to hear more about the collective and collaborative part of both your projects. Because you, Fiona, say at the beginning that you and the working group you worked with knew from the very beginning how you wanted to work together, and I wondered if the way of working together changed, and to what extent also in your research you find differences between this kind of collaborative work now from the collaborative work of the other two events. And for you, Ahmeed, I was wondering what, because you say you knew what you wanted from the workshop, and what was that, and how this collaborative part of the work is integrated in your research that seemed to be pretty personal research.
Yeah, so we were confronted also with conflicts and groups and persons, I don't know, not talking for each other for a long time after this or whatever. So there was Sophie Holzberger, who I think was drawing us to reflect actively on our work. What do we want from this? So we would write how do we want to work together? So we would write actually all that down and then coming together. And also, we were all living, not all living, but living in different cities and countries. So we were working on Zoom mostly. And we do emotional rounds. We will actually talk about on which how much capacities we could give now, and how this project also were really overwhelming for us. And I feel the precarity that work that we were confronted with in feminist film work also reflects on our situation. Yeah, so this may be what we wanted to differently to have.
I think maybe something I didn't do about the workshop. I didn't say about the workshop is that I was amazed by the reaction to the call. I mean, if I had a list of interesting critics in my head, I know I want them to apply. I want this person to apply. I want that person to apply. Almost 80% of the people I had in my mind, they actually applied. So I ended up with actual serious people at the end, which made it also a challenge, because what actually happened is that I've put this layout that is saying, oh, we're going to do the tools thing, and then we're going to do about commitment and cinephilia, and then we're going to talk about the history. They were all okay. But then when I start a session by saying, this is what we're going to do today, and then by noon, they would have something else that they want to do for the other half of the day. And usually they do it. And that was like an amazing contribution. Of course, I hated it in the beginning, but then it was actual, genuine, personal interest from their part in the archive. And then at that moment, I started to see this archive with different eyes, with their eyes, which was super refreshing, because I was like super bored with this archive at that moment, and at the moment that I want to see it again. I've been reading a lot of stuff, but through their eyes, now it got actually renewed, and it was as if this archive has been reintroduced to me again. And I'm in the process of working on those events that I spoke about, and this process is also teaching me a lot about what I'm supposed to know better than the participants, which is this archive. But through working on those events, and because each of them has focused on something, it's now reintroduced to me. But also, honestly, we're learning a lot from the Cine Club itself, how they translate stuff to each other, how they actually have put a lot of effort for this thing to happen, for an actual publication to be printed and to be available each time and with every screening, how the stuff actually get collected and get published, how the copies are there, how the films are translated, how they keep it going in a cinema in Cairo, although they want more money and although there is a lot of stuff, how they work on budgeting, how they make elections for their board. That was also honestly a source of inspiration, of an activity that is managed on collectively in a way that we cannot find around ourselves now in Cairo. Those actually, we had no similar thing.
So thank you both again for these really wonderful presentations, and for the discussion, and thank you also to the audience for very interesting debate and conversation. So thanks.
Thank you.